gentlemen, once again, we're back talking about our new set of notes called the Constitution. We're going to do this real quick. We've already gone over a lot of this in class, so let's just review real quick. So, the Constitution. Again, this is our second rule book. The first rule book, the Articles of Confederation, didn't work. And this new rule book breaks up the Constitution breaks up the government into three different branches. Yep, you know them: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And not one branch has all the power. They made this so that no one branch could abuse its power and become overpowerful. They all keep each other in check. That's what makes our government work, because no one group of people can take over and mess up the government. We all keep each other in check. So let's start with the executive branch. The executive branch is who? Yep, you're right, the president. He is in the executive branch. And the requirements to become president, he's got to be at least 35 years old. He's got to be born in the United States. And he's got to live in the United States for in the last 14 years. Again, you got to do this because because in 14 years you'll know what's going on in the country. If you just show up like yesterday and say I want to be president, and you show up for the country, they're going to say, well, what do you know about the country? And you're going to say nothing. So they made this rule so that at least you know what's going on in the country before you decide to run it. Maximum time in office is 2 terms. Now, how much is a term? You're right, 4 years. So total time that a president can be in office is 8 years. And what are his important powers? Well, first of all, he's in charge of the military. He's in charge of the military. Also, he's the one that gets to choose who's going to be in some of these important jobs, like Secretary of State, Supreme Court judge, all the important positions, he gets to choose them. So if President Obama, who's president at this time, he selects me to be the Secretary of State, do I get the job? According to this, he says, I say yes, but as you know now, I don't get the job automatically because, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Finally, he gets to have the power of veto, where he can reject any ideas for a new law. So if the Congress comes up with a law to say that 8th graders gotta wear uniforms, if the president doesn't like it, he can veto it, and no matter what the Congress says, the president still has that power to cancel it out, and that's called a veto. All right, so let's talk about the legislative branch. They are who? You're right, the Congress. The Congress is a legislative branch, and it consists of 2 groups of people, or 2 houses, and they are, yep, you're right, the Senate and the House of Representatives. These are 2 groups of people inside Congress. So if a congressman shows up in our classroom, he can say, I'm a congressman. You can ask him, well, are you from the Senate or are you from the House of Representatives? Because a congressman could be both. And their important powers is, first of all, they get to make the laws. So if they come up with an idea for a law, they are the ones that put it into play. And then the president will either decide to sign it to make it a law or veto it to cancel it. They can override a veto, however, with 2/3 majority vote. Now, here's the big question. If the president has a veto and the Congress has the power to override that veto, what's the big deal? Congress can just make a law, the president can veto it, and then Congress can just, override the veto, and the law becomes passed. Well, here's the deal. It's very difficult for Congress to override a veto. Well, why is it so difficult, Mr. Rangel? I'm glad you asked that question. It's difficult because in order for Congress to override a veto, that means that part of the same party as a president would have to go against a president. For example, the Congress is broken up mainly into half, half Republican, half Democrat. And if the president is a Democrat, like he is now, and the Congress is half Democrat and Republican, well, the Republicans are obviously, for the most part, going to vote against the president. But that's not 2/3 majority. That's 1/2. That's only 50%. So that means that another third has to vote against the president, and that would mean that would have to come from the same party as the president. So a bunch of Democrats would have to vote against their own president, and that's very hard, because if you vote against the president who's the same party as you, when you want to get reelected, are you going to get help from the president? No, because he's going to say, "Aren't you the guy that voted against me in that veto?" So it's very unlikely that someone from the same party as the president is going to vote against the president in a veto. It happens, but it's very rare. It's very difficult for a president to have his veto overridden. Finally, the president can approve or reject presidential. The Congress can approve or reject presidential nominees, and it can declare war. Going back to the approval or rejection of presidential nominees, this is what I was talking about to you earlier. When I said that the president picks me to be the Secretary of State, I don't get the job automatically, because first I have to go to Congress. And Congress is going to say, "Well, Mr. Rangel, what do you know about the job?" And I'm going to say, "Absolutely nothing. I just want to get on a plane and go travel around the world and meet all these famous or important governmental officials from other countries. That would be cool." And they'll say, "Well, what are you going to tell them?" I say, "I don't know." And they'll say, "Well, then you're not good enough for the job," and they would reject me. So that keeps the president from getting all his family and all his friends to be part of the government. Before they can get those big, important, high-paying jobs, they got to be approved by the Congress. And then the Congress is the one that declares war. Congress decides to send our soldiers off to war, not the president. The president, he's in charge of the military, but he can't declare war, because all of a sudden, what happens if the president just gets mad at a country all of a sudden? He can just say, "All right, let's go to war." And it can't happen like that. You gotta think about it. You gotta have a lot of minds deciding whether or not going to war is a good idea. And so if you leave it up to the president, you'd be at war all the time, especially if the president is one that likes to fight. The Great Compromise. You're going to hear a lot about this in the future. The Great Compromise. The compromise is when two people who don't agree figure out some way to agree. Well, in this case, the Great Compromise was between the two kinds of states, the big states and the little states. Remember, the big states wanted a lot of representation. They wanted a lot of power because they had so many people in their state. And the little states said, "No, that's not fair. That's not fair. We're a state too. We want the same amount of power as the big states." And so they're going back and forth, and finally they came up with the Great Compromise. And that compromise is called the bicameral legislature. What in the world, Mr. Rangel, does that mean? Bicameral legislature. Well, let me tell you. Bicameral just means two. Bicameral, two houses. Well, they decided to go ahead and make two groups of people in Congress. And you know who they are. We told you they are the Senate and the House of Representatives. And I think in this actual picture it's backwards. I think the Senate is on that side and the House of Representatives is on the other side, but it doesn't really matter. There's two different kinds of houses. So let's talk about these two groups of people. The Senate. Each state sends two people to the Senate, and this made the little states happy because now they get the same amount of power as the big states in the Senate. So each state, no matter how big you are, no matter how small you are, you get to send two people to represent you in the Senate. So how many senators are there total in the Congress? Well, 2 times 50 states is what? Right, 100. So if I ask you on the test, how many senators are there in Congress, you're going to say, right, you're going to say 100. 2 per state, 50 states, 2 times 50 is 100. Requirements to be a senator, they got to be at least 30 years old. They have to live in the state where they are elected, and their term is for 6 years. So senator stays a senator for 6 years, and they can stay as long as they keep on getting reelected. 6 years. Every 6 years they got to get reelected. So remember, Senate and 6 both start with S. So that's how I remember how a senator's term is 6 years. For the member of the House of Representatives, each state sends how many people to Congress? Now, this is the big question. Remember, the little states were happy because they got equal representation in the Senate. Each state got 2 votes. So all the little states are happy. But the big states, now we got to make them happy. Remember talking about the Great Compromise. So the big states said, we want a lot of representation in Congress. And so to make the big states happy, they said, all right, in the House of Representatives, you can send as many as your population demands. So if you have a state with a lot of people in it, you get to send a lot of people to the House of Representatives. If you have a state with a little bit of people in it, then you send a little bit of people. That way the big states are happy because they get to send a lot of people to represent all the people in their state. So the Senate sends 2, and the House of Representatives send as many, or it depends on the population of the state. Requirements. Again, they got to be 25 years old. They got to live in the state where they're elected, and their term is 2 years. So every 2 years, they got to get reelected. So House of Representatives is 2 years. Senate is 6 years. Try to remember that. So let's talk about the judicial branch real quick. Judicial branch is the Supreme Court, and all the courts really, but the Supreme Court, we're going to talk about them because they are the highest court in the land. You can't get any higher than the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, it has 9 judges. Now, why 9 and not 8 or 10? Right, because you need an odd number, or else you get a bunch of ties. They're the ones that decide all the big cases. And these judges are selected by the president. Now, let's say the president says, "All right, Mr. Rangel, I want you to be the judge. I want you to be a judge in the Supreme Court." Do I get the job automatically? No, of course not. I have to be approved by who? Right, I got to be approved by the Congress, the legislative branch. So, and they're the ones that decide. Oh, there you go. They're selected by the president, but they got to be approved by Congress. Now, how long is their term? How long is the term of a Supreme Court judge? Right, their term is for life. They get that job for until they die or until they retire. And they're the ones that, well, here's the important powers. Now, before I go there, what's the requirements to be a Supreme Court judge? With senator and House of Representatives, president, you have age requirements, and you got to live in a certain part of the country and all that stuff. How about for the judges? Are there any requirements? No. Anybody could be a judge. I could be a judge. You could be a judge. But you got to be first nominated by the president and approved by Congress. And most likely, we are not going to be nominated by the president. And if we are, we certainly are not going to be approved by Congress because we don't have the skills and we're not old enough and all that stuff. But there have been judges on the Supreme Court who have never been to law school. Nowadays, however, they're looking for judges. Judges in the lower courts and other experience as a judge, but not a requirement. Not a requirement. I thought that's kind of interesting. Important powers, they get to rule on the important cases, important issues of the day. So you think about any important issue, there's a lot of debate, a lot of controversy, people are arguing and protesting back and forth. Supreme Court will make a judgment on it. That's their job. They decide. But the big power they have, and I think this one where we talk about keeping the other branches in check, they can declare a law unconstitutional. So let's think about that law that was talking about the uniforms. Let's say the Congress says we want all 8th graders to wear uniforms, and they make it into a bill. The bill then goes to the president. The president says, well, he can either approve it and sign it, or he can disapprove it and reject it and call it a veto and call a veto and reject it. But let's say the Congress says, yes, we want uniforms for 8th graders. And the president says, yes, I want uniforms too, and he signs the bill, and it becomes a law. So the next day, you guys got to come to school wearing uniforms. Now, let's say that one of your parents is a lawyer and says, wait a minute, I don't think that's fair. I think that's unconstitutional. I think that it's against one of the rights we have under this new rule book. And so they'll take it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will look at the Constitution and look at the law, and if they feel that the law is against what the Constitution says, they can reject the law, and it goes away. And they've declared that law unconstitutional. So that's how you keep the president and the Congress from making all these crazy laws. If they all of a sudden they make all these crazy laws, the Supreme Court will look at the laws, compare it to the Constitution, and decide whether or not that law should go forward or that law should be erased based on the fact that it was unconstitutional. So, when each branch keeps each other in check, keeps each other from using its power, we call that checks and balances. Checks and balances. And this is when each branch keeps each other in check. All right. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you study. Make sure you prepare and study for the test coming up soon. All right. This is Mr. Rangel. I'll see you in class.